In this video, I will be providing you with a few ideas on how you can replace tongue and groove siding. And this is going to be vertical up and down siding. The methods could be similar for replacing it when it is going horizontal or from right to left. Now, if you do have vertical siding, then you are going to have blocks, and they're usually going to be 24 inches on center. So on an 8-foot wall, you would probably have 3 rows of blocks like we have here, and that is so you can nail the siding into something when you're in the middle of a stud bay. So not too difficult. 1 or 2 nails. In tongue and groove, sometimes you can blind nail this stuff too. Put a nail in over here and make it look like there aren't any nails at all in the siding. So again, giving you an idea here. Without the paper, let's go ahead and put the building paper on. Building paper is usually going to be in between the wall framing and the siding. And to install it, you're simply going to slide it in to the groove here, and that of course is going to help hold everything in place. Now let's go ahead and take a board that is damaged here. Just going to put a little bit of damage in the middle. Then we are going to cut a line down the entire length of the siding. Now you don't need to do this. I cut it down because of my little patch here. I wanted you to be able to see the line. I would recommend just cutting it down the middle, and you might even want to cut a couple of lines. So it's going to be difficult to get your saw up into the roof area underneath the roof eaves, but you might be able to take and cut a line, and then maybe even cut another line, and then cut a section out, and then get some type of a saw to where you can cut from here to there, and just do it in sections. That might actually be the best way to do something like this. But once we have a saw cut down the center or down the siding, we'll be able to remove the pieces with a pry bar. And of course, it's going to depend upon how it is nailed and what nails or screws might need to be removed before you can actually remove either one of the sides. Next up, we will pry the larger board out. And again, this might be difficult. If the board isn't coming out easily, then maybe the saw cut wasn't deep enough here, or there might be a few more nails or something holding it, attaching it to the framing that you might have to find. And in order to do that, you might actually have to get a pry bar in there, pry it out to find out where some of the nails are, depending upon how the board is finished. If they use some type of putty to cover everything, then you can't see the nails, then you're going to have to pry. And I don't recommend using a lot of force. You have a board that's not going to come out, stop, and then just cut smaller sections out. And of course, if you cut a smaller section out, you're probably going to be able to see where the nails are. If they nailed it in the middle, at the edge, or you might be able to find something that is hidden that you didn't see before. But just to grab this thing and jerk on it and pull it out, I don't really recommend that. Just be careful taking it out and try not to damage the boards on the side, either side, of course. And after that board is out, we can go ahead and remove the next piece. And now we have an empty slot, and the next problem you're going to face will be to find a board that is the exact same size. It is not going to be uncommon to find a board that's going to be a little bit larger or a little bit smaller for this type of repair. But in our example, I found a board that was the exact same size, and we're not going to have any problem getting it in, except for this notch right here. This section is going to have to be removed. We're going to be able to slide it in here most of the time and then push it up tight in here, but we're not going to be able to get the groove here. We're not going to be able to get it behind the tongue on this board here. So we're going to be able to slide this into here. we're just not going to be able to get this in here. And I'm not saying it's impossible. You might have to, you could slide it in for the top or the bottom, of course, but for this method here, we will need to remove this edge here. Again, you're not going to be able to go behind the tongue there, at least unless you have a method that I don't know about. Please share it with us. But for those of you who have done this type of repair before, this is probably going to be the best way here. Again, you could always cut the tongue off of the other side. That's not going to be a big deal, and then leave the groove. You can pick one, you just won't be able to have both of them. Hopefully that makes sense. We have made our repair and slid the board under here, and we can now nail this to the other side. Now, this would be difficult to blind nail, but I'm not suggesting you can't go into the little groove here. You can't go into here and put some finish nails in there to make it work. So again, this part will need to be cut, and in some cases you might need to cut it a little wider. So again, if the board is a little longer, you might need to cut it back a little further. A little gap here is not going to be a big deal. I don't recommend more than 1/8 of an inch, but a gap here to make the board fit in a little easier isn't going to be a big deal. But if it is a little longer, you might be able to reshape this side to make it fit. You might be able to use a router or even run a saw at a 45-degree angle down the side of it. Or even take your time, grab a planer and shave some of this stuff off. And if there's a little gap here, let's say the board's a little too small, you got a little gap here, you could always fill that with caulking if you wanted to make it look like it blended in a little easier, depending upon how small the board. I mean, if you have a board that's 1/4 of an inch shorter, this is going to be a noticeable groove, a noticeable gap from the outside, and that you might have to just make your own board or make your own siding if that's the case. Grab a piece of lumber that's a little larger and shape the sides to make it work out. Now the next method, depending upon the damage, if you have 2 boards that are damaged, or if you just want to use this method here, would be to remove 2 or 3 of them, and then try to put it back together like this. And this might require a couple of people to help you with this, but if you can somehow kind of get everything to line up here, you might just be able to kind of like push it in and everything's going to go into place. Now, if you do push something like this in and it's tight and you're using dry lumber, don't be surprised if this wood buckles in the winter time when it has a chance to absorb some moisture. And I'm just throwing that out there. You know, when I say something, don't be surprised. You know, I'm just kind of pointing something out. It might not ever happen. If it does, hey, at least you're not going to be surprised. Now, what am I suggesting? To use wet lumber? No, because the wet lumber, or lumber with a little more moisture in it, you might put it on and it's tight, and then it'll shrink, and then you'll have gaps between everything. So this right here is not the easiest repair to make. And if you're making this, you're a contractor and you're doing this for someone else, point this stuff out to them. Don't just come out and say, hey, yeah, I can fix that, and you're never going to have a problem with it. I have seen quite a few problems from these type of repairs. Now, let's go to our next repair, and that would be if you had some damage that might be 3 or 4 boards away from a corner. If this is the case, then remove these boards and replace all 4 of them. You know, that way if some of the wood expands, it might push towards this side. And of course, let's not leave out the fact that this right here is going to be a little easier repair. You're going to be able to pull each board off and then replace it. And, you know, can you pull the boards off? If I had damage 6 boards in, let's say, you know, and 5 of the boards are good, you can be careful and pull the boards off and then reuse them. And if you are going to reuse them, reuse the ones that you have. Put them in first and then put the new board in on the outside. Now let's take a look at another method. And of course, if you have some damage in different areas, you can actually just cut a section of that damage out and replace the board also. Keep in mind that doing this type of repair, you might damage the building paper. If you do that, you're going to have to fix it somehow. And if you need more help on that, leave a comment in the comment area. I believe I don't think I do have a video on that yet, but I am going to do another video too on this. This video was inspired by someone else's question who wanted to know how to replace the damage with the tongue and groove with a pipe sticking out of it. And of course, I'll put a link in the comment area when that video is made. So let's go ahead and take a look at the damage again. It's up here. Get a saw, cut through it, be as careful as you can. And again, if I'm going to replace this, I can take and cut it into sections, and I can be careful. If this is 3/4 of an inch thick, I might be able to take a 5/8 blade and cut through and then get a chisel and pull some of this stuff out. If you can pull it out without damaging the paper, then you're going to be in a good spot. Now, I do got to point this out too. If you do replace something like this, you might need to find out where the blocks are and then cut at the block line, because otherwise you're not going to have any backing behind here to fasten the new piece of wood in, unless you're planning on tearing out some of the building paper, putting a block in, and then replacing it. So find the block lines, the ones that I was talking about that are 2 foot on center, and then cut in the center of the block at the top and the center of the block below, and then you'll have something to nail or screw the new piece into when you do make the repair. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, if you are on the bottom or somehow on the top where you have the room, you might be able to slide a new piece of siding up from the bottom, like just following the grooves. You won't have to cut the back of the tongue out, or the back of the shaped lumber, I should say. Won't have to cut that out. You can simply slide it in and then nail it at the bottom or the top. And this, you won't have to worry about cutting it where the 2 foot block is, because the tongue and the groove on each side will hold it in place. Now let's go ahead and take a look at another method. Let's just kind of pretend like we have a lot of damage on the bottom of the siding that needs to be repaired. And if that's the case, just simply cut a line down the bottom of it, get rid of it wherever the damage is. If you have some damage on the bottom and you only have 1 or 2 pieces that might be able to be fixed with some type of a filler, then you won't have to go very far. But I've seen these before where the bottom of it is damaged, at least up 3 inches, wood rot and stuff like that. If that's the case, simply figure out what you're going to use, a 2x6, 2x8, or a 2x10, something like that, and then cut off the desired amount so that the board will fit into place. So not too difficult of a repair. The only problem with this is you're probably going to end up cutting the paper again. And if you do, don't worry about it. Cut the paper. Have the desired length that you need. So if you're going to have a 2x10 and it's 9.5 inches wide, it would be nice to have a 1 inch overhang off of where the top of the foundation is. So have it stick down at least 1 inch. And then of course this would come up 8.5 inches. You would snap a line and then cut that where you needed it. Now this one might require some type of blocking to nail the siding into, otherwise you could have a problem there. And of course the siding here, I'm going to go ahead and pull the siding out a little bit so that you can get an idea what I'm doing. So I have my building paper here. I need to get a piece of metal, Z-bar, something like this, behind it, so that any water that comes down on the front, it might come back a little bit, but it's going to roll out. Any water that comes, that gets behind the siding, is going to roll down the front of the paper and out. I do not want to put the Z-bar behind the siding. That's not going to benefit me as well. I'm not saying you can't do it. I would just rather see it behind the paper if you can get it. But if you can't, then just make sure that the other layer of building paper is going behind that. So here you can see where if I had the metal and it was installed on the front of the paper but behind the siding, then the building paper lapped over each other, I'm probably not going to have a problem. So either way would probably be fine. But again, I like to do it to where I have the building paper over the metal, and then it gives me another kind of like reassurance, some extra insurance to have the water drain away a little safer. And then of course you can put your bottom board in here, and then no one's going to know any different. They're going to think, hey, that's how the house was built. And let's just take it apart here to give you an idea of what we were doing. I know this works well, makes my videos longer, but some of you don't know what this metal looks like. Kind of looks something like this. Kind of makes a Z shape, usually referred to Z bar. The building paper underneath. This might require you to pry some of this stuff forward a little bit to get this paper underneath. That installing the paper might be the hardest part of your project. And of course you might need to remove the paper. You might need to have the lower section of the paper removed so that you can install your blocks. How you can install your blocks, unless you want to remove the drywall from the inside. And again, I'll leave that up to you. So the size of the blocks might be determined by what you're doing. So let's just say that a 2x4 is going to be a little harder to install. Well, then get a 2x10 or a 2x12, something that's going to be bigger, but you're going to be able to nail it down here maybe a little easier. I've actually had these blocks before where I couldn't nail them to the studs, and I would simply use screws and screw the siding to the blocks and then just let them float in there. And that seemed to work out just fine. So by screwing the blocks to the siding, and then eventually, one of them I could screw to the studs every 16 inches, really seemed to create a sturdy lower section there. And I've never had any callbacks on that where I had to come back and fix it. And again, I always like it when someone says they never had any callbacks on something. Well, maybe the people moved, and 2 years later your stuff wasn't working and you never got a call back. So not always saying that some stuff is going to be the best, but sometimes nailing the blocks in here, it's going to be difficult to do. If that's the case, you might need to figure out something else that's going to work for you. And for my last repair suggestion, if you have damage on the bottom that it's a little too much, you need to cut it a little higher. It's going to be kind of the same idea as the previous example, except you might need to use wider blocks for this one here, and you'll understand why before we finish the video. Building paper again is going to have to slide underneath the other building paper so that it's over. The water is going to flow over onto. If this building paper was in front of the building paper here, any water that gets behind the siding is going to flow down the front of this building paper and then of course onto the wood framing. So this laps underneath, lower laps underneath the upper. Give you an idea of what it is right there. Same thing with the metal. 2x4 might work here. You might want to use a 2x6. You can use whatever you want. A 2x2. 2x2 might twist over time. 2x4 might be the smallest piece of lumber you're going to want to use. And then reinstall the siding. And of course, here's what I'm talking about with the blocks. We have larger blocks, so we're going to be able to nail the upper part of the lower siding here. We're going to be able to nail this into the blocking. If we use the 2x4, not going to happen. So I'll give you an idea here. And I know this looks like it's metal or open, but the up one above has the metal, and this is just open here. So larger blocks probably going to be the answer to that. And for those of you who are looking for a little more insurance, cut a notch at the bottom so that all the water that runs down the face here runs onto the edge and then down. If it is flat at the bottom, the water can actually go in between the gaps if there are any at the top of the siding. So another suggestion there. Hopefully that makes sense. And of course, this is how I would do it also. I like this idea. That's why I threw it in there. But that might not be enough. You might be looking to change the design of your building. And if that's the case, you can install stucco, T111 plywood, or even lap siding at the bottom to make it, to add some type of architectural feature to it. And of course, the notch might need to be changed or modified to fit the appropriate width of the new building materials. And that brings us to the end of the video. Any questions, comments, leave them in the comment area and I will answer them as soon as possible.